A perfect family, a shocking betrayal, a journey to hell and back. When Jesus told this story, it shattered every assumption about love, forgiveness, and second chances. This is the ultimate comeback story that still transforms families 2,000 years later. You can picture the family compound in first-century Palestine, sprawling vineyards, olive groves heavy with fruit, servants moving efficiently through courtyards that spoke of generations of prosperity. The morning air carries the scent of fresh bread and the quiet satisfaction that comes with wealth earned through honest work. At the center sits Abram ben David, whose weathered hands tell the story of 5 decades building something meaningful from nothing. Through careful planning and backbreaking work, Abram had transformed his modest inheritance into one of Galilee's most successful agricultural enterprises. His older son, Matthias, had embraced the family legacy with crown prince seriousness. At 28, he managed daily operations with meticulous attention, rising before dawn, negotiating contracts, treating every shekel as if survival depended on it. The southern vineyard is producing 20% above projections. Matthias would report during evening business reviews. "I've negotiated Jerusalem's storage for surplus, record profits by Passover." But his younger son David had always been different. Where Matthias saw responsibility, David saw adventure. At 22, he possessed natural charm that made strangers feel like lifelong friends within minutes. "Why store grain for next year?" David would ask, eyes bright with dangerous confidence. "Why not sell everything now and invest in Alexandria shipping ventures that return triple profits?" These conversations grew more heated over the past year. The tension reached breaking point during the harvest celebration, when David made an announcement that would shatter their family forever. "Father," David said, rising dramatically, "I don't want to wait until you die to receive my inheritance. I want my portion now, while I'm young enough to enjoy it." The silence was deafening. In their culture, demanding inheritance while the father lived was tantamount to saying, "I wish you were dead." It rejected everything the family represented. "Do you understand what you're asking?" Abram said quietly, voice steady despite chaos churning in his chest. David quote, A's response revealed his devastating immaturity. "I'm 22, and I've never made a decision about my own life. I have dreams that don't involve managing olive groves the same way for 30 years. That night, walking alone through his vineyards, Abram faced a choice that would define his character and family's future. He could refuse David's demand or honor his request, knowing it would likely lead to disaster, but hoping love expressed through freedom might accomplish what control had failed to achieve. 3 days later, Abram sat surrounded by scrolls and ledgers representing a lifetime of building prosperity. David stood across from him, no longer charming, but hardened by family arguments and growing realization that his demand had wounded his father deeply. "Are you certain this is what you want?" Abram asked one final time. David quote, "S jaw was set with determination that comes from burning bridges. I can't spend my life managing what you've built. I need to build something of my own." The mathematics were brutal. David was entitled to 1/3 of everything, but converting theoretical wealth into cash required selling properties and dismantling carefully constructed business relationships built over decades. The southern vineyard produces 800 denarii annually. Abram calculated methodically, should sell for 12,000 denarii. David leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement that made Abram's heart sink. His son saw not crop yields but immediate purchasing power. Hours of painful arithmetic followed as father and son worked through family dissolution. Sheep, cattle, grain, equipment, everything evaluated, priced, allocated. Abram found himself selling not just properties, but memories. Matthias watched from the doorway, face masked with fury. "David, do you understand what you're doing? You're not just taking your inheritance, you're destroying ours. Those groves have produced for 40 years. You'll still have 2/3. David replied with contempt. "What I do with my portion doesn't affect you." But it wasn't true. Selling prime properties would reduce overall productivity, generate less income, support fewer employees. Within a week, 37,000 denarii was converted into gold and silver coins packed for travel. On departure morning, the household gathered in the courtyard that had hosted countless celebrations. Abram embraced his son with desperate intensity, knowing he might never see him again. "Remember who you are," he whispered. "Remember where you come from. Remember that you are loved." David walked through the gates without looking back, absolutely convinced he was about to discover what real living looked like. Behind him, Abram began the daily ritual that would define the next 2 years, walking to the road at sunset, looking toward the horizon, hoping today might be the day his son came home. Damascus was international commerce's jewel, where fortunes were made and lost with desert sandstorm regularity. For David, arriving with 37,000 denarii and naive confidence, the city seemed like paradise, designed for someone with his combination of wealth, charm, and complete lack of wisdom. Within hours, David had rented the most expensive suite in the premier inn, with servants, musicians, and sophisticated pleasures. 50 denarii per week, more than his father's shepherds earned annually. "Life is for living," he told Cyrus, a Greek merchant's son, who quickly attached himself after recognizing new wealth and inexperience. "My father spent 50 years accumulating money. I intend to discover what money can actually buy." Cyrus became David's guide to Damascus's underground economy of pleasure and sophisticated vice. Gambling houses, imported wines, luxury goods that existed solely to demonstrate wealth rather than serve practical purpose. The gambling began as entertainment, but quickly became addiction. David discovered talent for reading people, but complete inability to read odds. Spectacular wins followed by more spectacular losses. Initial capital began shrinking alarmingly. The women were beautiful, expensive, and uninterested in anything except David's ability to pay. He rented apartments for girlfriends, who disappeared when generosity slowed. Parties became legendary among pleasure-seeking elite, but bought popularity that felt like love to someone who'd never learned the difference. By year's end, 37,000 had shrunk to 8,000. Instead of recognizing warning signs, David interpreted this as needing bigger risks to restore wealth. Business investments were disasters camouflaged as opportunities. Partnerships with merchants specializing in separating wealthy young men from inheritances. Shares in shipping ventures, existing only on paper. Mining operations, producing nothing but excuses. The second year brought escalating desperation disguised as sophistication. Cheaper accommodations, sold jewelry, friends avoiding his company as entertainment subsidies decreased. By the third year's beginning, David possessed less than 500 denarii, and growing understanding that Damascus merchants had been more successful at taking his money than he'd been at increasing it. Final collapse came with shocking speed. Gambling debts he couldn't cover, seized possessions, business fraud accusations, destroying his reputation. Within days, David found himself in a Damascus alley with no money, friends, or prospects, completely unprepared for a world suddenly hostile to someone who could no longer pay for belonging. Desperation strips away every pretense. For David, that stripping began when he realized he'd eaten nothing in 3 days and possessed no means of purchasing food. "Can you handle livestock?" asked Joab, a Syrian farmer whose weathered face suggested decades of struggle. He'd heard about a young man seeking any work providing food and shelter. David eagerly remembered childhood days, helping with sheep and goats. How difficult could livestock be? Reality proved humbling. Joab's farm was subsistence operation, barely keeping one family alive. The livestock consisted primarily of pigs, animals Jews considered unclean, forbidden to touch. "Feed them twice daily," Joab explained, leading David to a muddy pen, housing 30 disgusting creatures. "Kitchen scraps, spoiled grain, rotted food. Keep them alive until market time." The work was physically exhausting and spiritually devastating. David, who'd expected servants to handle dirty tasks, found himself wading through mud and waste, carrying slop that smelled worse than anything in his sheltered life. But psychological impact was worse. Every morning, he watched pigs consume food more appetizing than his thin gruel wages. "Even my father's hired servants eat better than this," David muttered, watching pigs devour breakfast while his stomach cramped. The observation hit with surprising force. First time in months, he'd thought about home without defensive resentment. His father's hired servants lived in comfortable quarters, ate regular meals, received fair wages, and were treated with dignity. They had security, purpose, satisfaction of honest work, fairly rewarded. David, by contrast, lived in cave-like shelter, survived on insufficient scraps, performed work, violating every religious principle, shaping his identity. The comparison became obsession during long monotonous hours, tending animals representing everything his upbringing taught him to avoid. Daily contrast between current situation and home memories became increasingly painful. "What am I doing?" he asked during miserable afternoon when rain turned the pen into swamp. "I'm starving while working for barely survival wages, caring for religious abominations, living like someone with no family, home or identity." The revelation struck like lightning. David was sitting in the pig pen, exhausted, watching animals eat while waiting for his bread ration. "I will arise and go to my father," he said aloud, surprised by the word's clarity. "I will say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." For the first time since leaving home, David saw his situation with perfect clarity. He hadn't been bad luck's victim or dishonest merchant's target. He had systematically destroyed every blessing through selfishness, pride, and reckless living, treating gifts as entitlements. "I demanded inheritance, as if father was dead," David realized. "I took 50 years of work and threw it away on meaningless temporary pleasures." More devastating than recognizing financial foolishness was understanding deeper betrayal against love itself. His father had offered partnership in meaningful enterprise. David had rejected that for immediate gratification, satisfying nothing. "He loved me enough to let me go," David whispered, remembering pain in his father's eyes. "He knew I'd probably destroy everything, but loved me enough to let me choose." At dawn, David began the most important journey of his life. Not the miles separating him from home, but internal distance between pride and humility, entitlement and gratitude. For 2 years, 4 months, 17 days, Abram ended each day identically, walking to his property's highest point, scanning the horizon for any sign his younger son might be coming home. The ritual had begun as hope and evolved into faithful waiting, persisting, despite complete absence of supporting evidence. Neighbors stopped asking after the first year. Family members stopped mentioning David after 18 months. But Abram continued daily vigil with sunrise, consistency, and unconditional love persistence. "Master," House Steward Benjamin said one evening, "perhaps it's time to accept David chose different life. Perhaps it's time to stop hoping." Benjamin's suggestion was practical, well-intentioned. Daily ritual was causing Abram pain, and the steward hated watching his master hurt himself with increasingly unrealistic expectations. But Abram's response revealed paternal love's depth. "Benjamin, fathers don't stop loving children, because children make destructive choices. Love isn't conditional on behavior or reciprocation. I will watch for David as long as I draw breath." The waiting had cost more than anyone realized. Business decisions delayed during evening watches. Social obligations declined. Health suffered from stress of constant hoping, mixed with realistic understanding his son might never return. Most difficult was managing relationship with Matthias, whose resentment had hardened into bitter anger. The older son had watched property liquidation, worked extra hours, compensating for David's absence, managed increased responsibilities without additional recognition. On the morning changing everything, Abram was reviewing harvest reports when a servant burst in. "Master, someone's walking toward the house, someone who looks like David," from his window, half a mile distant. Abram recognized his son's gait, despite 2 years' absence. But this David looked nothing like the confident young man who'd departed with elaborate commercial conquest plans. This David was emaciated, dressed in rags, walking with careful steps of severely depleted strength. What Abram saw was need, exhaustion, complete defeat. What he felt was overwhelming compassion, obliterating every hurt feeling, worry, fear about what David's return might cost. Before anyone could stop him, before considering social implications, Abram ran. In Middle Eastern culture, older men of substance never ran. Running was for children, servants, emergencies. Wealthy patriarchs walked with measured dignity, reflecting their status. But Abram ran toward his son with complete abandon, robes flying, sandals raising dust as neighbors stared at unprecedented sight of respected elder sprinting toward apparent beggar. David was rehearsing his practiced speech when he saw his father running with tears streaming, arms outstretched, promising forgiveness before confession could be delivered. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you," David began. "I am no longer worthy, my son." Abram interrupted, voice breaking with suppressed emotion. "My son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The embrace lasted minutes, while both men wept with intensity of people separated by more than geography, discovering love had survived every betrayal and disappointment. "Servants," Abram called, "bring the best robe, put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Kill the fatted calf. We celebrate, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again." The instructions represented more than practical welcome arrangements. Robe symbolized honor, ring represented authority, sandals marked difference between son and servant, fatted calf was reserved for most important celebrations. David, expecting servant treatment, if received at all, found himself restored to full family honor. His father's love hadn't just survived betrayal, it had grown stronger during absence. Within hours, the compound had transformed into festival ground rivaling weddings and harvests. The fatted calf was slaughtered, additional lambs killed for the gathering crowd, as news spread through community. But most significant wasn't food or guests, it was symbolic restoration. Abram orchestrated through every detail. The best robe was actually Abram's ceremonial garment, worn only for religious festivals. The ring was family signet, giving business authority. The sandals publicly declared son status versus servant, barefoot status. David struggled processing overwhelming generous reception. He'd prepared for rejection, servant employment, or grudging household acceptance. Instead, fine clothing, honor symbols, celebration seemingly disconnected from actual worthiness. "I don't deserve this," David said quietly. "I wasted everything, brought shame, violated every principle you taught." Abram's response revealed grace's depth. "Son, your worthiness isn't based on performance. Your family place isn't contingent on success or failure. You are my son, not because of accomplishments, but because of who you are." Community leaders arrived, including those who'd observed David's shocking departure, watched property liquidation, seen family reputation suffer. Now witnessing equally shocking paternal love demonstration, transcending conventional justice understanding. Abram asked Rabbi Nathan, "How do you justify celebrating a son who squandered inheritance on dissolute living? What message does this send?" Abram's revolutionary answer, "Rabbi, my son was lost, and now found. He was dead, and now alive. What father wouldn't celebrate when children come home?" The celebration continued with music, dancing, communal joy emerging, when entire communities witness grace, triumph over judgment, love overcome disappointment, families heal from seemingly permanent wounds. But one crucial family member remained conspicuously absent. Matthias, the older son who'd maintained the farm 2 years, and managed increased responsibilities without complaint, hadn't appeared at his brother's welcome feast. His absence was noticed but not discussed, because everyone understood family dynamics complexity and that older sons might need processing time. What guests didn't know was Matthias was working in distant fields, deliberately avoiding the house, because he'd seen celebration preparation and understood its meaning. For 2 years, he'd been the faithful, responsible, non-shame-bringing son. Yet his brother, who demanded early inheritance, squandered everything, disappeared without communication, was being welcomed with celebration. Matthias had never received, despite consistent faithfulness. The contrast was becoming resentment's source that would soon explode into confrontation, revealing hidden family dynamics and forcing examination of fairness and what children owe parents versus what parents owe children. Music and laughter carried across fields where Matthias worked by oil lamp light, deliberately extending duties to avoid the homecoming party everyone expected him to attend. For 2 hours, he'd listen to joy sounds while struggling with emotions too complex for processing. "The young master has returned," announced Joash, a servant sent to inform Matthias and encourage participation. "Your father asks that you join the feast, so he's back," Matthias said, not looking up from unnecessarily thorough olive tree pruning. The prodigal returns, and suddenly everyone forgets he took his inheritance and disappeared without word for over 2 years. "Your father is very happy. He keeps saying his son who was dead is alive again." "Dead?" Matthias's humorless laugh contained bitterness. David wasn't dead. He was living it up in Damascus, spending everything father worked 50 years accumulating. Now that money's gone, he comes crawling back, expecting hero. For 28 years Matthias had been perfect son, worked diligently, saved carefully, respected parents, maintained family reputation, delayed marriage plans to ensure enterprise continued thriving, never asked for early inheritance, never questioned business decisions, never brought shame. Yet David, who'd violated every family value, wasted family disappeared, was being welcomed with celebration, Matthias had never received despite consistent faithfulness. "Where's my fatted calf?" Matthias muttered, throwing pruning tools with unnecessary force. "Where's my celebration?" As celebration sounds grew louder, Matthias' resentment reached breaking point, demanding confrontation. He walked toward house with determined steps and expression, warning everyone to stay clear. The party was full swing when Matthias arrived, David at attention center, telling edited Damascus adventures to hanging on every word audience. The returned prodigal wore their father's best robe, displayed family signet ring, received respect and admiration Matthias had always longed for. Instead of joining celebration, Matthias stood at courtyard edge, his presence creating tension that gradually silenced conversations as guests noticed obvious anger. "Matthias," Abram called, walking toward his older son with welcoming arms. "Come join us. Your brother who was dead is alive again." But Matthias stepped back from embrace, voice carrying across suddenly quiet courtyard. "Celebrate. You want me celebrating your son who squandered inheritance on prostitutes while I stayed here, working fields, building business, never disobeying commands." The accusation challenged not just David's worthiness, but Abram's judgment and fairness understanding. "Look," Matthias continued, voice rising with accumulated resentment, "all these years I've slaved for you and never disobeyed order. Yet you never gave me even a young goat for celebrating with friends. But when this son, who devoured property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf." Words cut through celebration like sword, revealing family dynamics hidden beneath surface harmony for decades. Matthias wasn't just angry about David's reception, he was expressing years of feeling unappreciated despite consistent faithfulness.
Every guest witnessed drama revealing universal family relationship truths, sibling rivalry, and complex justice-mercy intersection every family must navigate. The confrontation created profound silence as the natural world seemed to pause, understanding something significant was unfolding. The celebration suspended between two pains, a son feeling faithfulness unrecognized, a father discovering love expressed differently, had created unintended wounds. "My son," Abram said quietly, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours." It was fitting to celebrate, because this brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. The response addressed Matthias's complaint while revealing deeper truth, echoing through families for 2,000 years. Love isn't diminished when shared. Grace doesn't become less valuable when extended to undeserving. Celebration of one child's restoration doesn't invalidate another's faithfulness. Divine love operates according to different mathematics than human families, where resources are finite. Grace extended to repentant sinners doesn't reduce grace available to consistent believers. God's love isn't pie requiring smaller pieces for more people. It's spring producing more water when more people are thirsty. Jesus intentionally ended the parable at this tension moment without revealing whether Matthias joined celebration or family achieved reconciliation. That ambiguity challenged assumptions about worthiness, fairness, and unconditional love's nature. 2,000 years later, it continues transforming families because it addresses universal human experiences, transcending cultural boundaries, children rebelling against parental values, children remaining faithful to expectations, parents navigating complex challenges of loving different children differently while ensuring none feel unloved. Modern psychologists recognize this as family systems analysis. Masterpiece illustrating how good intentions create unintended consequences, how conditional love masquerading as unconditional wounds everyone, and how grace can heal seemingly irreparable damage. Family therapist Dr. Sarah Chen uses this story as framework for helping families navigate consequences, forgiveness, and restoration dynamics. Every family dealing with addiction, mental illness, or destructive patterns faces identical challenges. Dr. Chen explains, how do you maintain love for someone whose choices destroy themselves and hurt everyone? How balance consequences with grace? The story's transformative power comes through revelation that love is stronger than failure, grace more powerful than guilt. Family bonds can survive devastating betrayals when approached with wisdom, patience, and restoration commitment rather than punishment. Contemporary applications help families navigate modern challenges, reflecting identical spiritual dynamics. Parents dealing with children's addiction find guidance in Abram's consequence. Estranged adult children discover repentance reconciliation models. The story endures because it captures universal truths about human nature, divine character, and redemption possibility transcending every human boundary. It reveals coming home isn't just geographical journey, but spiritual transformation requiring humility, grace, and courage from everyone involved. Most importantly, it demonstrates love isn't fair in equal distribution sense. It's fair in meeting each person exactly where they are with exactly what they need. David needed forgiveness and restoration. Matthias needed recognition and appreciation. That's why this story still transforms families. It proves love really is stronger than death. Grace can triumph over judgment, and no one is ever so lost they can't be found by love. Watching Horizon daily, hoping today might be homecoming day.